The night before the FIFA World Cup Final, Benjamin sat alone in the locker room of the World Cup Stadium, long after the cheers of football fans had faded into the distant hum of the city. His jersey, folded neatly beside him, carried the weight of more than a football tournament. It carried a lifetime. Tomorrow, the world would see a World Cup champion crowned, a World Cup winner lifting the World Cup trophy beneath the lights of the grandest football stadium ever built for the FIFA World Cup 2026. But tonight, Benjamin was not thinking about becoming a football champion. He was thinking about his father. Tucked inside his bag was a letter he had never opened. For years, reporters had called his rise the best football story of the decade. They labeled it an amazing football story, an emotional football story, a powerful motivation story. Some even said it was the best inspirational story in international football. Headlines read like a script from a FIFA World Cup emotional story, a FIFA World Cup inspirational story, even a FIFA World Cup family story. But none of them knew about the envelope with his father's handwriting on it. Benjamin was known across global football as the quiet football hero with a champion mindset story. Commentators described his football journey as success against poverty, winning against all odds, a true against-all-odds story. They said his football success story redefined professional football. They called him a future football legend. Yet before he became the face of World Cup football, he was simply a boy in a broken neighborhood with a football dream. It had started as a single-dad football story. Benjamin's father had raised him alone after Victoria passed away when Benjamin was just 6. She had been warmth and music in their tiny apartment, and when she was gone, silence moved in. What followed became a single-dad emotional story, whispered through their small kitchen at night. His father worked double shifts, sometimes triple. A true single-dad worked hard for his son reality that shaped everything. Their life became a single-dad sacrifice story, written in unpaid bills and worn-out shoes.
In those early years, theirs was a poor father, rich son story in reverse. They had no money, but his father gave him riches of belief. It was a father's love story that defined a father-son story unlike any other. Every evening after work, no matter how tired he was, his father would take him to the cracked asphalt behind their building. There, under flickering streetlights, began the father-son football story that would one day become a world champion story. "This is your road to the FIFA World Cup," his father used to say, placing the old ball at Benjamin's feet. "Every touch matters." Benjamin didn't understand then what how to win FIFA World Cup truly meant. To him, it was just a soccer story unfolding in a neighborhood that barely noticed. But to his father, it was a single-dad dream story, a vision of a single dad to world champion written long before anyone believed it possible.
When kids at school mocked his worn cleats, his father would kneel beside him and whisper, "Never give up story. That's what ours will be." And it was. The single-dad never-gave-up attitude became the foundation of Benjamin's football motivation. Rain or cold, hunger or exhaustion, training never stopped. It was a single-dad hard work story built on repetition and faith. His father studied football skills online after midnight, learning drills to improve his son's football training. He turned their hallway into a practice lane. He timed sprints in the parking lot. He transformed their struggle into an inspirational football journey. Neighbors started calling it a single dad and son football journey worth watching. Coaches saw something special. Scouts began to whisper. The media would later name it a single dad raised a football player miracle, then a single dad raised a football star phenomenon. But in those days, it was just a father and a boy chasing a football dream story. When Benjamin earned a scholarship to a youth academy, reporters framed it as a life-changing story. His father framed it as hard work pays off story. "This is just the beginning of your football career story," he said. "Stay humble, stay hungry." Through every football match, every setback, every injury, his father remained the quiet force behind his football inspiration. When Benjamin nearly quit after being benched at 17, his father sat beside him on the curb and told him about winning against all odds. "Champions aren't born in stadiums," he said. "They're built in moments like this." That lesson became Benjamin's football motivation story. Years later, when he signed his first professional football contract, journalists called it a single dad success story and a single dad inspirational journey reaching its peak. But his father only smiled and said, "This is just another step in your football family journey." Then came the call that shattered everything. His father collapsed at work the week Benjamin was selected for the national squad. The doctor said it was his heart. Years of exhaustion, years of sacrifice. The man who embodied single dad sacrifice was gone before Benjamin could say goodbye. At the funeral, someone handed him the sealed envelope. "He wanted you to open this when you reached the World Cup," they said.
Benjamin carried that letter through every qualifier on his journey to FIFA World Cup, through every brutal international football clash, through every stadium where football fans chanted his name. Analysts praised his football success against poverty narrative, calling it an emotional sports story, an inspirational family story, a champion success story. And now, on the eve of the FIFA World Cup Final, the world expected him to become a World Cup champion, a World Cup winner, to complete the dream comes true story arc they had already written. But they didn't know about the letter. They didn't know that this single dad FIFA World Cup moment felt incomplete without the man who made it possible. They didn't know this was more than a FIFA World Cup story or a football champion story. It was a heart-touching story, perhaps the most emotional story of his life. Benjamin picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Outside, the empty World Cup stadium lights flickered off one by one. Tomorrow would decide the FIFA World Cup champion story, the FIFA World Cup winner story, the final chapter of his road to FIFA World Cup. Tonight, it was just a son and his father's last words. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, the edges worn as if it had been opened and rewritten many times before being sealed for good. Benjamin unfolded it slowly, his hands unsteady in the quiet locker room of the World Cup Stadium. The words were written in his father's familiar handwriting, steady and deliberate. "My son, if you are reading this, it means you have reached the FIFA World Cup, maybe even the FIFA World Cup Final. Maybe you are about to become a World Cup champion. But before you think about winning the FIFA World Cup, I need you to remember something more important than any football trophy or World Cup trophy." Benjamin's throat tightened. "You were never chasing a trophy. You were building a life. This was never just a football story. It was your football life story. It was our father-son story. It was the single dad World Cup story we dreamed about in that broken parking lot." Tears blurred the ink. "People will call it a single dad raised a World Cup miracle. They will say single dad raised a football champion. But the truth is, you raised me too. Every time you got back up, every time you trained when others rested, every time you chose discipline over distraction, you showed me what a champion mindset story truly means." Benjamin could hear his father's voice in every line. "I know the world will turn this into a FIFA World Cup emotional story or a FIFA World Cup inspirational story. They will make it a FIFA World Cup motivation story. They will say it is the best FIFA World Cup story. Let them. But you must remember what it really is.
It is a father changed his son's life story, yes, but it is also a son who honored his father. Benjamin pressed the paper to his chest.
On your road to FIFA World Cup, you will face fear. In the football finals, you will feel pressure like never before. In that World Cup stadium filled with football fans from across global football, when the noise feels overwhelming, close your eyes and remember the silence of our old apartment. Remember the echo of the ball against the wall. Remember that before you were part of international football, you were just my boy with a football dream. The letter continued. You used to ask me how to become a football champion, how to reach the FIFA World Cup, how to win the FIFA World Cup. I always gave you drills, routines, and football training motivation. But the real answer was simple. Be the hardest worker in the room. That is the road to becoming a football champion. That is a football hard work story. That is football never give up.
Benjamin let out a broken breath. Tomorrow, if you step onto that field for the FIFA World Cup 2026 and you feel fear, remember this. Fear means you care. Pressure means you're alive. And if you lose as a man who honored his football family journey. If you win as a man who stayed humble. The final lines were underlined. If you lift that World Cup trophy, I don't want you to think about me. I want you to think about the boy who believed in his football dream. Because whether you are a World Cup winner or not, you are already my world champion story. Never forget where you came from. Never forget why you started. And never forget that this is bigger than football. This is love. Dad. Benjamin sat there long after he finished reading. The magnitude of it settled deep in his chest. The letter did not feel like a goodbye. It felt like a command. The next evening, the World Cup stadium was a living ocean. Flags waved, anthems echoed, the FIFA World Cup football atmosphere vibrated through the air. This was the peak of World Cup football, the final chapter of the greatest football tournament on earth. Commentators called it the ultimate FIFA World Cup soccer story, a clash that would define a new World Cup champion. As Benjamin walked through the tunnel, cameras followed every step. Analysts repeated his narrative. Single dad raised a World Cup champion. Single dad world champion story. Single dad football champion. Single dad World Cup winner. They replayed clips of his childhood neighborhood, framing it as success against poverty, as an emotional success story, as the ultimate football success against all odds. But inside his mind, there was only his father's voice. When the whistle blew, the match erupted into chaos and brilliance. It was a brutal international football battle. Every football match moment carried the weight of history. His opponents were relentless, chasing their own dream to champion destiny. This was not just a game, it was a collision of football dream to FIFA World Cup journeys.
In the 20th minute, Benjamin missed a clear chance. The stadium groaned. Commentators questioned his composure. Social media exploded. The narrative threatened to shift from football miracle story to tragic collapse. He closed his eyes. Remember the silence of the apartment. The next touch was different. He moved with clarity, each pass precise, each sprint purposeful. Years of football training, every repetition from that single dad hard work story flowed through him. This was football player success motivation in motion. This was football champion motivation embodied. Halftime arrived with the score tied. In the locker room, tension crackled. Teammates argued. Coaches barked instructions. Benjamin stayed quiet, unfolding the letter again, not to read it fully, but to touch it, to ground himself in the father's love story that began it all. Second half, 75th minute.
The opposing defenders slipped.
The ball rolled free. Benjamin saw not grass, not goalposts, but a flash of memory, his father clapping under flickering streetlights. He ran. One defender, cut inside. Another, faint left. Goalkeeper charging. He remembered the words, "Be the hardest worker in the room." He struck the ball low and hard. Time slowed. The net rippled. The World Cup stadium exploded. Football celebration thundered across the stands. Commentators screamed that this was the defining moment of the FIFA World Cup champion story, perhaps the greatest FIFA World Cup comeback story ever witnessed. They called it the ultimate football comeback journey, the climax of a single-dad FIFA World Cup legend. When the final whistle blew, Benjamin fell to his knees. He was a World Cup champion, a World Cup winner, a football champion.
Teammates piled on top of him. Confetti rained down. The World Cup trophy shimmered under the lights. Cameras zoomed in as he lifted it high, completing the dream comes true story the world had been waiting for. But as he held the trophy, he whispered softly, "We did it, Dad." Because this was not just a FIFA World Cup success story, it was a father-son football story that had changed the course of his life, and the secret letter had changed the final. The roar inside the World Cup stadium did not fade quickly. It rolled like thunder across the sea of football fans, echoing through the history of the FIFA World Cup. Benjamin stood at the center of it all, holding the World Cup trophy above his head as gold confetti fell like rain. Commentators were already calling it the greatest World Cup winning story in modern international football, the moment that defined the FIFA World Cup 2026. This, one analyst shouted, is the ultimate FIFA World Cup underdog story. A football underdog story that became a world champion story before our eyes.
On giant screens, images of Benjamin's childhood flashed across the stadium. The cracked asphalt, the dim streetlights, his father clapping with tired hands. The world saw it as a single-dad World Cup story reaching its perfect ending. Social media exploded with phrases like "single dad raised a World Cup winner" and "single dad raised a football champion." The narrative was already becoming legend. But for Benjamin, this was not about headlines. It was about the quiet journey that had led here, the football life built on sacrifice. It was a single-dad life story transformed into a champion story. As he walked toward the podium to receive his medal, he felt the weight of every step in his football journey to success. Reporters would later call it a football success story for the ages, a football player success story rooted in discipline and belief. They would frame it as an inspirational sports story, a best soccer story, an emotional football story that proved dreams were still possible.
When the captain handed him the World Cup trophy, he looked into the stands. For a brief second, he imagined seeing his father there, standing quietly at the top row, nodding once with pride. That image steadied him more than any speech could. The post-match ceremony blurred into interviews and flashing lights. A journalist from a major network leaned forward and asked, "Benjamin, people are calling this the most emotional FIFA World Cup story ever told, a single-dad FIFA World Cup miracle. What do you say to that?" He paused. "This is not a miracle. This is a hard work pays off story. This is a family sacrifice story. This is what happens when a father believes in his son before the world does." The clip went viral instantly. Fans labeled it the best football story and the most powerful motivational story of the tournament. Hashtags appeared everywhere. Single dad inspirational story, single dad success story, football dream success story.
In the days that followed, documentaries began to outline his road to FIFA World Cup.
They traced the journey to FIFA World Cup from a poor neighborhood to the biggest stage in World Cup soccer. Analysts dissected his football skills, his relentless football training, his discipline in professional football. They called it a football champion life story and a football player life journey that redefined dedication. Yet what captured hearts most was not the goal, it was the letter. Someone had noticed him holding a folded paper in the locker room before the match. Rumors spread. When he finally chose to share parts of it publicly, the world listened in silence. The letter became known as the core of the FIFA World Cup emotional journey, the turning point in the FIFA World Cup comeback story that sealed the final. Viewers described it as a heart-touching story, the most emotional story of the year. Sports networks replayed his words over slow-motion clips of his decisive goal. They called it an emotional sports story and an inspirational football story that transcended sport. But beyond the media, something deeper was happening. In neighborhoods across the country, single fathers sat with their sons watching interviews. The phrase "single dad motivation story" began trending alongside "single dad football motivation." Community centers replayed his speech about belief and discipline. Coaches used his words in locker rooms as football motivational speech material, telling young players this was how football changed his life. Benjamin returned home 2 weeks later, carrying the World Cup trophy into the same neighborhood where his football dream had started. Kids gathered around him, eyes wide. Some wore jerseys with his name. Others held old scuffed balls like the one he once used. One boy stepped forward and asked, "How to become World Cup champion?" Benjamin smiled gently. "Start by becoming the hardest worker in your street. That's how to become a football champion. That's how to reach FIFA World Cup." His answer echoed the lessons of his father. It was football player success motivation rooted in humility. It was football inspiration made simple. A local newspaper ran the headline, "Poor Father, Rich Son's Story Ends with World Cup Trophy." Benjamin asked them to change it. "It's not about rich or poor," he said. "It's about love." They revised it to read, "Father inspired his son, son became World Cup winner." In schools, teachers used his journey as a never-give-up story example. Sports academies labeled it a football comeback journey and a football success against all odds blueprint. Even veteran players called it a football miracle story born from relentless preparation. One evening, months after the final, he visited his father's grave. He placed a small replica of the World Cup trophy beside the headstone. The grass moved softly in the wind. "We did it," he said quietly. He told him about the interviews, about the kids, about how the single dad raised a soccer star narrative had grown beyond football. He explained how organizations were launching programs inspired by his story, how it was being described as a single dad football journey that reshaped perspectives. He knelt there for a long time, reflecting on the football family journey they had shared. The long nights, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, the belief. This was more than a single dad champion story. It was a life-changing story for both of them. As he stood to leave, he felt something settle inside him. Winning the FIFA World Cup had fulfilled a dream, but honoring his father's lessons would define his future. In interviews, he began emphasizing football life lessons over trophies. He spoke about success after struggle, about the champion mindset required to withstand pressure. He reminded people that this was not just a FIFA World Cup success story, but a testament to fathers everywhere who quietly shape greatness. The world continued to celebrate him as a world champion, a soccer champion, a football legend in the making. But in his heart, he remained a son shaped by a single dad's sacrifice.
The letter had changed the final, yes. But more importantly, it had reminded him who he was before the lights, before the headlines, before the world called his journey the best inspirational story in sports history. He was still that boy in the parking lot. And this was still a father-son football story at its core. Success did not slow down after the FIFA World Cup. If anything, it accelerated. Invitations poured in from every corner of global football. Sponsors called it the most marketable football success story in recent history. Producers wanted to turn it into a FIFA World Cup inspirational video, a FIFA World Cup motivational video, even a full-length film described as the best FIFA World Cup story ever captured on screen. But Benjamin approached everything with the same calm discipline that had defined his football journey. Fame was loud, his father's lessons were quiet, and quiet always won. At an international sports summit, he was asked to deliver what organizers advertised as the best football motivational story speech of the year. Thousands of young athletes filled the arena. Some dreamed of professional football, others simply wanted hope. The banner behind him read, "Road to Becoming Football Champion." He stepped to the podium without notes. "My journey," he began, "is not just a FIFA World Cup life story. It is a single dad inspirational journey. It is a single dad sacrifice story. It is what happens when a single dad never gave up." The audience leaned forward. "When my father trained me after working double shifts, that was football training motivation. When he believed in me after I failed trials, that was football player motivation. When we had nothing but an old ball and a dream, that was football success against all odds." He paused and looked around the arena. "If you want to know how to become a football champion, start with discipline. If you want to know how to reach FIFA World Cup, build habits when no one is watching. If you want to know how to win FIFA World Cup, learn how to lose first." The speech spread across social media as a football emotional video and a soccer motivational story that resonated beyond borders. Commentators called it the most authentic, inspirational sports story they had heard in years. Clips were shared with captions like "Dream to Champion" and "Football Dreams Come True." Still, Benjamin never forgot the roots of his football life. He created a foundation named after his father, focused on supporting single parents raising athletes. The initiative quickly became known as the most impactful single-dad family story movement in sports. Headlines read, "Single dad changed his son's life. Now, son changes lives of others." In one workshop, a boy stood up and said, "My dad works 2 jobs. We can't afford a real academy. Is there still hope?" Benjamin walked down from the stage and handed the boy a signed ball. "This," he said softly, "is a single dad football dream. And dreams don't depend on money. They depend on work." That moment became another heart-touching story, replayed across networks as an emotional success story. Analysts described it as proof that the World Cup winner emotional story was not just about one final goal, but about legacy. Months later, during a high-profile international football charity match, Benjamin faced a young defender who had grown up watching his World Cup final goal. The stadium buzzed with anticipation. Commentators framed it as a continuation of the FIFA World Cup champion story, a passing of the torch in the making. During halftime, the young defender approached him nervously. "You're the reason I believe in my football dream," he admitted. "Your single-dad world champion story gave my family hope." Benjamin smiled, seeing a reflection of his younger self. "Then make your own story," he replied. "Make it better." That exchange circulated online as a touching football story, reinforcing his reputation as not just a football champion, but a mentor. Meanwhile, documentary crews released a series titled Journey to FIFA World Cup. It detailed every chapter of his football career story, from local leagues to the FIFA World Cup 2026 triumph. Each episode ended with a reminder: this is a never-give-up story. Viewers across continents called it the most realistic football story ever told. They said it captured the truth behind the grammar of World Cup football, the sweat behind the football celebration, the grind behind the football trophy. In interviews, Benjamin often redirected praise towards his father. "This was a single dad raised a football star reality," he would say. "It was never about talent alone. It was about belief." One journalist asked, "Do you ever feel pressure being labeled a football legend?" He shook his head. "Legends are stories people tell. I'm still writing mine."
Despite his humility, his influence expanded. Youth academies adopted his training philosophies under programs titled Football Hard Work Story and Champion Mindset Story. Coaches replayed clips of his decisive goal from the World Cup finals to teach composure under pressure. But the most meaningful moment came quietly. On the anniversary of the FIFA World Cup final, Benjamin returned to the old parking lot where his journey began. The asphalt had been repaired, new lights had been installed. A small plaque read, "Single Dad Raised a World Cup Champion." He stood there alone at dusk, ball at his feet. He began to juggle, just as he had as a child. No cameras, no crowd, just rhythm. For a moment, he felt like that boy again, chasing a football dream story without knowing where it would lead. The wind carried distant city noise, but in his mind he heard only one voice: "Never give up." That phrase had become more than advice. It was the heartbeat of his football inspirational journey. He looked up at the darkening sky. "Thank you," he whispered. Because beneath every headline, beneath every award, beneath the title of World Cup champion and World Cup winner, there remained a simple truth. This was always a father-son football story, a single-dad football story, and no trophy, no stadium, no global recognition could ever be greater than that. Years passed, but the night of the FIFA World Cup final never faded from memory. The goal, the roar, the lifting of the World Cup trophy all became part of football history, replayed whenever analysts discussed the greatest moments in World Cup football. Yet for Benjamin, the true victory had never been confined to a single football match. It was written across a lifetime, across a single-dad football story that began long before the lights of the World Cup stadium ever found him. On the 10th anniversary of winning the FIFA World Cup, a global broadcaster organized a tribute called The Road to FIFA World Cup, a legacy of belief. They described it as a FIFA World Cup football story that changed how the world understood success. Former teammates, coaches, and even rivals gathered to speak about the World Cup champion who had redefined what a football success story looked like. One speaker called it the ultimate FIFA World Cup emotional story. Another described it as the most powerful FIFA World Cup inspirational story ever told. A youth coach labeled it a FIFA World Cup never-give-up story that inspired an entire generation. Social media once again filled with phrases like FIFA World Cup touching story and FIFA World Cup heart-touching story. But when Benjamin took the stage, he did not begin with the final goal. He began with his father. "This," he said, holding up the preserved letter now framed in glass, "was the real turning point. People think the final changed my life, but the truth is, a father changed his son's life long before that whistle blew." The audience fell silent. He spoke about the single dad's sacrifice, about nights when the electricity flickered and meals were simple.
He spoke about the single dad hard work story that unfolded quietly while the world slept. He described how a single dad raised a football champion, not with money, but with discipline and faith.
My story, he continued, is often called a single dad FIFA World Cup legend, but it is really a father-son story about belief, a father-son football story about showing up every day. He looked toward the crowd where young players sat wearing academy jerseys. If you remember anything from my journey to FIFA World Cup, remember this: football is more than a game. It teaches you life lessons from football that apply far beyond the pitch. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you humility. It teaches you that hard work pays off. The applause was not loud at first. It was steady, deep, emotional. After the event, a documentary crew asked him one final question for what they were calling the emotional FIFA World Cup story finale. If your father were here today, what would you tell him? Benjamin smiled softly. I would tell him that the dream came true story wasn't about becoming a World Cup winner. It was about becoming the kind of man he hoped I would be.
That clip spread faster than any highlight reel. Viewers called it the most emotional story in sports history. Comment sections filled with fathers promising to attend more training sessions, sons thanking parents for sacrifices, families sharing their own against-all-odds story. In the years that followed, Benjamin slowly stepped away from competitive professional football. He had already secured his place as a football champion and a soccer champion, but his next chapter focused on mentorship. He created academies under a simple motto: believe in your dreams. Each academy wall carried a phrase: single dad raised a World Cup winner, not as a boast, but as a reminder of possibility. One afternoon, a teenager approached him after training. My family struggles, the boy admitted. Sometimes I feel like giving up. Benjamin placed a hand on his shoulder. This is your never give up story, he said, and it doesn't end in defeat unless you stop writing it. That moment became another inspiring sports journey shared widely online. Commentators said his post-career impact might surpass even his football career story. Analysts described it as a football family motivation movement that transcended borders. As years turned into decades, the FIFA World Cup 2026 final was still replayed before every new tournament began. Commentators would say, "Remember the emotional FIFA World Cup story of the single dad and his son." They would describe it as the FIFA World Cup champion story that proved heart could stand beside talent. Children who had not even been born during that tournament now wore his number, dreaming their own football dream to FIFA World Cup path. Coaches referenced his journey when teaching how football changed his life and could change theirs too. On a quiet evening, long after retirement, Benjamin returned once more to the renovated parking lot of his childhood. It had become a small community field now, named in honor of his father. A mural painted along the wall showed a man and a boy under streetlights, a ball between them. He stood there alone, older now, but still carrying the same calm focus. He placed the original letter inside a small time capsule buried near the center circle. Attached was a note of his own. To whoever finds this, your circumstances do not define your ceiling. Your work does. Your belief does. Your love does. He covered the capsule and stepped back. This had been more than a single dad World Cup story. More than a FIFA World Cup success story. It was a life-changing story about what happens when love meets discipline. As the sun set, neighborhood kids began arriving for practice. Laughter filled the air. One boy kicked the ball too hard and chased after it, grinning. Benjamin watched them for a moment, then quietly joined in, passing the ball back with a gentle touch. The World Cup trophy sat somewhere in a museum now. The medals were stored safely away. The headlines had faded into archives. But the legacy remained alive in every child who dared to believe. And somewhere beyond trophies and stadiums, beyond titles like World Cup champion and World Cup winner, beyond labels like best inspirational story or emotional success story, there lived a simple truth. A father believed in his son. A son honored that belief. And that was the greatest victory of all.